if you talk about, this idea about socialist society, uh, how this will look like, can you give us some kind of picture of that society?
Yes. Let me try to do it real quickly. The transition from one economic system to another has happened many times in human history, but one thing we learn when we study it, it's difficult, it takes time, and it goes through many, let's call them experiments, before it figures out how to make the system work. So, for example, coming out of European feudalism, a system of lords and serfs and all of that, there were many experiments in a different system, a system which didn't have lords and serfs, but instead had employers and employees. Very different system. One used money, the other one didn't. One had wages, the other one didn't. One the serf swore to be loyal to the lord. The employee doesn't swear anything to the employer, etc. So very different systems. But in order for the transition to happen, if you study European history, you discover that an effort to make a switch happened in Belgium, happened in this way in Holland, happened this way in Scotland, happened this way in Spain or in Ireland, or in lots of different places. Some of them didn't last more than a few weeks. Some lasted a few months and years. But they had to learn from the early experiments. This seemed to work, but this was terrible. So we got to learn to do more of that and less of that. Okay. The critique of feudalism is as old as feudalism itself. Serfs were rebelling against lords throughout its history. Workers, employees have been rebelling and mumbling and grousing against employers from day one. I mean, I've worked in many places. The one thing I can tell you is whether it's an ice cream parlor or a factory or an office or a university, the employees always have problems and criticisms of the employers. Okay. After a certain point, you develop a systematic criticism. You begin to realize it's not this particular thing, it's not that particular thing. It's really the way this is set up. A tiny group of people, the employer, could be the owner of the business, the person who started it, could be a board of directors elected by shareholders, but it's a tiny group. They make all the decisions. They decide what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the product or the revenue from selling the product. And they make the decisions they want to. That's why they're the rich people, because they give themselves the bulk of the profits the business make. You, the employee, you come there, you do what you are told, then you go home and you have a pizza and you come back the next day and you do that all again. You have no control. You participate in no significant way. The people at the top are not accountable to you. You never vote for them, nothing. Okay, at a certain point, people began to figure out that's the problem. Just the way slaves at a certain point stopped saying, give us more food, or give us a better shirt, or give us a bed to lie down on. They began to realize the problem isn't the bed or the shirt, because behind that is the master and the slave. The problem is slavery. And then they become anti-slavery, and then it's over. Then it's only a matter of time. Well, we have that. We have a history in which the ideas of what's wrong with employer-employee have been developed. We have Karl Marx. We were lucky relatively soon after capitalism gets established, they produce a person who can pull it all together and say, here, this is the problem, this system has to go. And so people read that takes decades, and they think about it, and then we have the beginnings of experiments. First experiment, 1871, city of Paris. The workers rise up and take over the city. It only lasts a few weeks. Called the Paris Commune. If you've never heard of it, go look it up. Very exciting. Marx is still alive. So there's direct connection between Marx, who's sitting in London, and the Paris Commune over there. Okay, next experiment. 1917, Russia, the Russian Revolution. And then, as we all know, the Cuban Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, North Korea, North Vietnam, and so on. These are all early experiments in trying to go further. And in those experiments, the key idea was the government. We, the people, have to get the government either by winning elections or by making revolutions, one or the other. And there were great debates about which way to do that. But one way or another, we're going to seize the state, and the state is going to make sure to treat us much better than the capitalist employers ever did. They're going to give us free education, subsidized housing, regulated work situation. You know what was done in certain ways in Russia, China, Cuba, etc. However, we also learned Russia fell apart after 70 years. So we have lessons to learn, because obviously something they didn't work. And we have to be honest and hard thinking about it. Number two, the government there not only managed the economy, but took on a lot more power over our daily lives than many of us are comfortable. We have to learn that, yeah, we need this, but we can't give the government that much power. That has to be rooted in the people. That's a flaw in Russian experiment, Chinese experiment, and so on. So where are we now? Well, we've had a whole bunch of experiments. We have a lot to learn from. We have learned. Therefore, my answer to your question, in the 21st century, the one we're living at the beginning of now, socialism is going to take a different direction based on its own history. It is going to be making critiques of capitalism. That is becoming easier because capitalism is having more and more difficulty. But the real key lesson is we didn't do something in all of the early experiments, and that missing something, we're going to make the key point for us now. And that missing something is we did not transform, or if you like better, revolutionize the workplace. The place where 8 hours a day you go either into a factory, an office, a store, whatever you want to call the workplaces of society. Could be a household, could be a farm. That doesn't really matter. That had to be revolution, and we didn't do that. We took over the government. We made private property, collective property. We had planning instead of markets. We did big things, macroeconomic things, but we didn't transform. To be crude, instead of a board of directors of a company elected by shareholders, they were government officials. The government sent them in. That's what the Russians did. That's what the Chinese do for, a quarter to a third of their economy. That's the state-owned and operated enterprises. What the Chinese permit to this day is that both in the state enterprises and in the private enterprises, and they have a huge private capitalist sector, Chinese and foreign capitalists, they don't revolutionize the workplace. And what would that mean, a socialist workplace? Answer, democracy. That's the irony. You democratize the workplace, and the workplace becomes a community governed democratically by itself. Every worker has one vote. Whatever you do, one vote. And the majority rules what we're going to produce, how we're going to produce, where we're going to produce, and what we're going to do with the revenue that this enterprise generates. That's a democratically debated and decided operation. The workers, therefore, have become their own employers. You have finally broken the pattern. Master slave, gone. Lord serf, gone. Employer employee, gone. Workers themselves running the enterprise. And in that, you will have found, I believe, the necessary partner for all the other changes that socialists have tried to make them produce a society that isn't destroyed by too much power in the government, because the power will be at the base. There will be no government that can survive without the workers in each enterprise sharing a tax payment or not doing it. And that's going to be decided workplace by workplace, year in and year. It's going to transform how these societies work. And I think it's going to grab the imagination of working people, because it's not a revolution that happens somewhere else. It's a revolution that happens in your daily life. You're going to be going to a workplace where you are not a drone, you are not told what to do. You are, by virtue that you're there, part of the leadership, part of the directorship of this enterprise. You're going to develop skills you didn't even know you had. You're going to be given an education that people like you and don't normally get. You're going to have a different sense of yourself. You're going to have a set of problems. This is not nirvana. This is not some fantasy of all our problems go away. Not at all. But it is a set of problems grounded on, ironically, what people already say they believe, that the democratic way of organizing communities is a better way to go than the autocratic that we come from. Here's the irony, and I don't know if this is as true in Britain as it is here. In the United States, democracy is the closest thing we really have to religion. Everybody says, oh yes, democracy, democracy. You must face east 10 times a day, bend over and say democracy, more or less, right? So here's the irony. In the workplace, where most adults spend most of their life, there is no democracy. You cross the doorway into the office, the factory, the store, and some supervisor or executive tells you, sit there, do this, that, now go home, come back, and tomorrow you're fired, don't come back. I mean, it's extraordinary. No claim to democracy, not even a shadow of democracy. And yet these same societies, which subject their people to the grotesque refusal of democracy 5 out of 7 days of the week in their workplace, insist on calling themselves democracy. President Biden tells the world that the war in Ukraine is for democracy, a quality that Mr. Biden wouldn't recognize if it came up and slapped him in the face.